Reflections by David Sampson. I remember very well when I first became aware of racial tensions and the role that it was going to play in my life. It was 1967 and I was 9 years old and living in a small town in central Michigan. Midland, Michigan had a population of about 25,000 at the time, and it was almost entirely white. We were living there because my dad worked for Dow Chemical, and we thought it was a safe haven for our family. But in that summer of 1967, Detroit burst into flames as one of the worst race riots in American history started on July 23rd. 43 people died during the riots, of which 33 were black and 10 were white. 473 people were seriously injured, including civilians, police, firefighters, and members of the National Guard. With over 7,000 arrests and $80 million in damage, it was a crushing blow to the city of Detroit. I remember quite well the tensions that we felt in Midland, which was just 2 hours away from Detroit, where we had heard rumors that cars of rioters were headed towards our town. For my family, the tensions were almost unbearable because I had an uncle who was a fire chief in central Detroit, and for the 5 days of the riots, we heard very little from him. And to make it worse, my aunt and uncle owned a gun and tackle shop in central Detroit. They lived in an apartment above the store, and my aunt refused to leave her apartment as long as my uncle was out on the streets. As desperately as my mom tried to get her sister to leave Detroit, she never succeeded. Finally, on July 28th, the streets of Detroit were quiet again. Thankfully, my aunt and uncle were safe, and their store only suffered a small amount of vandalism. But the fear and tension lasted for days and weeks. I remember hearing about how there were only 1 or 2 African American families living in Midland, and that they were being watched to make sure they didn't try anything. I don't know how much of this was true, but I do remember the feelings of fear. But of course it wasn't long before I got back to being a 9-year-old, and these events became a thing of the past to me. Just a few months after the riots, my parents enrolled me in a swimming class at the local pool. On my first day of class, I noticed a young African-American boy sitting by himself at the side of the pool. He was obviously part of the class, but none of the other kids seemed to be interacting with him. I'm not sure if I felt sorry for him or if I felt a kindred spirit because we both seemed to fear the water, but I started talking to him, and we soon started doing everything together. Over the course of the weeks of the class, he and I became good friends, and I always looked forward to seeing him at the pool. I still remember how on the final day of class, he and I were so worried that we weren't going to pass the test to become certified swimmers. And then, how much we shared the triumph when we both managed to pass the test. We remained friends for the few months I lived in Midland until my family moved away to California. But I still think about how the personal relationship with my friend was more powerful to me in defining my views of people who are different from me than even the fear that overwhelmed us in the summer of '67. He wasn't an African American to me, or part of a race that was feared by many around me. Instead, he was the boy who was my friend, and who shared my triumph. Throughout my life, I've been in many situations where I was exposed to different cultures or points of view, and it seems that I've always been able to develop the personal relationships that help me learn and grow in these situations. I feel that it was the lesson that I learned in Midland, that personal relationships can trump even the most fearful situations, that helped me through these times. And now, with my work in online learning, I need to understand that it is far too easy to isolate people. Whether it's because of not understanding the race-based discriminations that students face, or not appreciating how gender can influence interactions, or perhaps not taking into account issues that are important to another culture. I strongly feel that it is the personal relationship that will help us overcome the barriers in front of us. So I have to work harder to find ways to create those personal relationships in my work as an instructional designer, whether it's by requiring shared projects, or by including online chats, or by some other means. I feel that I owe it to my friend at the pool to help eliminate the fear and mistrust that so many of us hold on to when we don't understand other people. Thank you for listening to my story.